If they can't be skeptical about what I'm teaching them, the values, the things that matter so much, and they can't push back and ask questions so that they really deeply understand, then I'm not doing my job, because the second they get out in the world and they get tested on it, they're going to crumble, right? So we always tell our kids we listen to everything with just a tiny hint of skepticism.
And welcome to the Homeschool Perspective, where seasoned homeschooling moms share tips, insights, and resources to empower your homeschool journey. Welcome to the Homeschool Perspective podcast. Mark Twain is famously quoted for saying, "If you don't read the newspaper, you are uninformed. And if you read the newspaper, you are misinformed." We live in a time of unprecedented access to information, and many feel more confused than ever before. How do we weed through it all and teach our children how to do the same so that we can be informed and keep our peace? We have a lot of thoughts on this issue, so let's dive in. So guys, first of all, how do we define being informed in today's world? Like, what do you think about being informed here?
Well, okay.
I know, right? What is that?
I think we have to be careful with what it means to be informed, because I don't think that we were designed to hold all of the world's news at one point in time.
That's a really good point.
I think it's like it is so much. Like, if you really tried to stay on top of everything that is going on in all of the parts of the world, with all of the people in the world and all the countries and all the things, all the crossovers, it is more than a fire hose. It's too much. So I think being informed, what I would say, being informed means that the things that you have impact on and that have impact on you, you have a depth and breadth of understanding where you can make informed decisions about it. I think like that's the initial state of being informed. Yes, of course, we want to know what's going on in other places. We want to support and lift other people up. But I think there's a reality in that we can only hold so much. And especially when we're talking about our kids and trying to keep them informed and teaching them how to handle this. I mean, your peace can be really disrupted if you are looking at every single thing happening all over the world all the time. I'm hesitant to say that you need to know everything. Like, I think we have to keep in check what we are able to consume and digest. But, of course we want to lift people up. So I would say there's like a base level and then a spectrum, and you have to figure out what you can manage.
Yeah.
I think that information is a very powerful thing, and that when we limit it to what we're comfortable with, we do ourselves a disservice, we do our families a disservice, and ultimately we do the world a disservice, because we're not making the impact that we are called to make. However, I do also think that in different seasons, our capacity to handle certain information is greater or lesser based on where we're at. For instance, after my mom passed away, I couldn't handle like global devastation very well. I had to keep my world small for a little bit while I grieved. I was in my third trimester. I had a new baby on the way. I had 2 kids with special needs. They were very, very needy at that time with their medical issues. And I was grief stricken. I could not take in too much else, right? But if I stayed in that bubble, then I would be unaware of what's going on globally. So I think there are seasons where we have to use wisdom with information and being informed. And I also think we need to model that for our children, that it's okay. But I don't think hiding from information is okay either. For instance, I know people who say, I don't watch the news because it's too depressing. I appreciate that, but we also do need to be aware of what is going on in the world, because that's how crises happen. We're unaware of what's going on, so we do nothing to intervene. In fact, that if you look at, for instance, the Holocaust, it happened because people weren't waking up and taking in the information. So there's this balance that we have to walk between what we have the capacity for, because I can't imagine the news coming out, during World War II. I don't know that I would have had the capacity to consume news about that kind of evil, right? It would have been very uncomfortable. But I also think that we have a responsibility to understand at least a little bit of what's going on, and even if we're not sinking ourselves into it every day, all day long. And so there's this balance with information.
I agree that you have to be willing to take in information that you're uncomfortable with, because even the things that are in your sphere, you need to hear both sides so that you truly are making an informed decision. But I also think when we're looking, especially right now in this day and age, when you've got somebody who is at capacity trying to expand and hold that much, they're more susceptible to getting snippets of things that aren't necessarily accurate or true and are even created to evoke emotion that isn't helpful. So
Right.
I think, that's another thing is that if you're not in that state and like not in a place where you have the capacity to filter through those things, you either need to have some really trusted resources that you're going to be going to and not consuming generally or sporadically throughout other places, or you need to kind of rein it in because it is so easy to be frankly emotionally manipulated by the stuff that's out there, whether or not it's true. So I think, when we're talking about our kids too and teaching them, there's a piece of this where it's like you don't necessarily want to be consuming content about or like information about the world and about news and what's happening sporadically mixed in with other things, because it just is there's so much out there that is not connected to reality and does kind of set you off kilter. I think it needs to be something done and more intentionally. And when something comes across that elicits an emotional response from you, that in and of itself should be a signal like, okay, this is something that I need to find data about, like I need to find information about. Because I think right now there's just it because it's gotten so woven into everything we consume and isn't necessarily from a solid place. We have to be even more intentional. So if you don't have the capacity to be intentional, I think it's almost not okay to like just absorb whatever comes your way. Do you know what I mean?
So, like, being a passive absorber of information is just not possible. Like, you can't let yourself just become a passive
No, because you'll
absorber.
have no control over how you feel. It's gonna
Exactly.
like,
And then what happens is people passively consume things and then, like a game of telephone, emotionally release it back out there, and then that just perpetuates this cycle of misinformation and uninformed information. It's a mix of both with this emotional piece woven into it. And it just, how can we trust anything that we're seeing or reading, especially things on social media and things that our kids come across or things that our kids hear? Oftentimes, with our homeschooled kids, they're used to being in rooms with adults and having conversation with adults. And I know that my kids have come to me and just said exactly what I'm like, that came out of so and so's mouth, and it was they just repeated what they heard, but they don't have those critical thinking skills, those skills to determine. They don't know they're not getting their information from primary sources. They're hearing it from other kids that are also homeschooled or that have heard it from some other's place. So we have to teach our kids to have that discernment and to be able to weave through all of this stuff when there is so much thrown at us and our kids all the time.
I tell my kids everything you hear, even from mom and dad, because frankly, I want them to do this, but so you should always be skeptical, just a little bit. It doesn't mean that we have a negative view of people or we assume they're trying to trick us, nothing like that. But everything that you hear, you just want to have a tinge of skepticism to it. And you know what? I've heard parents get upset about this idea, like, well, no, they should listen. And I'm like, well, hold on now. If they can't be skeptical about what I'm teaching them, the values, the things that matter so much, and they can't push back and ask questions so that they really deeply understand, then I'm not doing my job, because the second they get out in the world and they get tested on it, they're going to crumble, right? So we always tell our kids we listen to everything with just a tiny hint of skepticism, and always asking questions. There is nobody in any circumstance that we should listen to, like any human being that we should listen to outright without just a hint of making sure our brain is engaged. There's no infallible human being. And so we always start with that. It's like, okay, well, and we also tell them if somebody is name calling, that should be a really good hint to you that there's more research that needs to be done on what that person's saying. Because if somebody is using names or threats or yelling, which, good gracious, we are seeing way too much of right now from grown adults. I cannot believe some of the rallies that are being put up on mainstream news. I can't. But we always tell them, like, if you hear somebody name calling, that already should knock down their credibility in your mind a little bit, right? If you have an emotional reaction, like a visceral reaction to something someone says, that should also be a sign to you that you need to look at it a little deeper, right? So we are trying to give our kids just cues and a general overlay of like, there is no human being that is infallible. There is no single source that is going to be 100% all the time. And so everything needs to have a lens of question and skepticism. We talk a lot about it's, a lot of times it's not even intentional. That we have generations at this point that have been educated differently. There's been lots of things that have gotten involved here. I don't even think people are necessarily aware all the time that they are being biased or that their information is completely inaccurate or that they are being harmful. I think there's a lot of people who actually don't know that. So we don't assume malice, but we always have to be thinking critically.
Well, and here's the important thing is that we model that for our kids, that they don't see us going to Facebook and going, okay, I just heard this about the government, or I just heard this about this event, right? Because I read it on Facebook. We've been bringing our kids to Instagram and showing them the account Sharon Says So. I really appreciate how she's explaining things, but I tell the kids, we still trust but verify. Do I like her as a source? Yes. Is she a primary source? No. And so we look at it. This is a great lens to learn how to read things and interpret them with very little bias because nobody's totally unbiased. And I've been using that to teach the kids. But at the same time, how many times does somebody tell me something? I'm like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. And then I'm like, wait, let me go read that and make sure that that is actually what's happening before I get invested in this. And that is so important. We as parents have to have discernment. As adults, we're responsible for what we take in and how we interpret it and then how we express it. And to teach it to our kids, we have to have a solid footing under ourselves, or we shouldn't be teaching our kids about it at all.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
when we're talking about this with our children, I'm thinking like, what is the first conversation that we're having with our young kids? And I think that, it's like that fact versus opinion. Just first of all, like our kids need to understand that. Like I'm thinking about my youngest and how am I going to set her up for understanding things in her future and in her world right now. So the like fact versus opinion is a good place to start. And then from there, realizing that trusting the facts, going to the primary source, what would you guys say are steps here? Like
we start really young.
Yeah.
We do
We start
too.
super
Yeah.
young. We start with, believe it or not, Bible stories.
Mm-hmm.
This is like my favorite conversation ever was an argument between my then 5 and 8-year-old kids who were sitting at the kitchen counter reading a book. And my one kid goes, look, Jonah got eaten by a whale. And my daughter goes, no, he didn't. And she's 5. And he's like, it's right here in the book. And she goes, that's great. But in the Bible, it says it's a great fish. And you can't just make it say what you want it to say.
Yes, go on.
I was like, whoa. And she was adamant. And so we will look at storybooks based on history, based on the Bible, things like that. And then I'll take them and I'll read them an article and I'll be like, okay, what are the differences? This is called creative licensing, right? Like we talk about this. Or we'll read a book and they're like, and so felt this. Well, does the Bible tell us how they felt? No, that's an assumption based on how we might have felt in that moment. So that's not true. That's something that somebody thinks might have happened. And we'll work through things like that. And we bring it up in conversation where maybe a friend is telling me, something that happened with her kids and my kid chimes in and goes, well, that's not what happened. I was there and this happened. And they were being really mean when they said that. Well, how do you know they were being mean when they said that? Now you're assuming motive. What clues told you that? Well, those words weren't nice. I said, okay, well, what makes them not nice? And we start to break down how we interpret conversations and meetings really young. And so then when we get to the news and we're listening to something when they're, I'm talking 12, 15, 18 years old, because we've got adults in our house and teenagers too. And I'm going, okay, but what bias are they sitting with? The reporter, what bias are they sitting with? Well, no, this is an unbiased piece of reporting. No, it's not. It's never an unbiased piece of reporting. What clues
Ever.
in here are telling you where they are sitting on this issue? Right. And so the outrageous accusations. Okay. So clearly they don't believe that side, or the horrific events of this date. Okay. Clearly they believe this is negative. Do I agree with them? Yes. Is it still a bias? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so recognizing that and teaching our kids to pick up on words and language cues is really important. So when we talk about information, sometimes I think it's less about how much we take in and more about where we get it from. Because the more primary sources you can go to, the less inflammatory the content usually is.
Mhm.
Even the most horrific things, when
Mhm.
presented clearly, are not as manipulative. Really, that's what it comes down to. They're not pulling at our
Absolutely.
strings.
Yep. I agree 100%. We huge primary source family. Like we and I've worked in advocacy and public policy for years, and so reading the actual laws and bills that go through in the comments and being there, that's like a huge part of what my kids have grown up seeing me do. But when I love everything that you just said, Lisa, and we implement so much of that in our home, but my kids are a lot younger, so we have slightly a couple different things that we do as well. I love the stories. We absolutely do that. But like when we have a kiddo say, well, I have one kiddo who hates Brussels sprouts and one kid who loves Brussels sprouts, right? And he's like, Brussels sprouts are disgusting. And I'm like,
Mm.
well, wait a minute.
True.
Are they? Are they disgusting?
Fact and
Oh, I love
opinion.
Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yes.
fact or opinion. And so even in tiny ways like that, it's really easy to be like, well, wait a minute, you feel that Brussels sprouts are disgusting. And then we talk about, what Katie Kimball taught us, that we,
Yes.
that
Different
we,
ways of preparing
your
them.
taste buds are growing up and all of that stuff. But there's little things like that that come up where it's just like, hold on, you can't assert your opinion as a fact either. And I think sometimes, with our really little ones, it's completely natural and we're not going to like harp on them, but just pointing it out to them helps them to start seeing that people, adults will assert their opinion as fact frequently in how they say things. And so identifying that I think is really helpful. The other thing we always ask our kids is, why do you think that? So when they share something, this is the best book, worst book, this is that, this is this, why do you think that? What led you to that conclusion? Or when we're learning about history and they say, well, that was a horrible thing to do. Well, why do you think that? What evidence do you have to support it? And I've even had my kids be like, do you agree with it? And I'm like, hold on, that's not what I'm saying. I want to know that you have formed an opinion that is based on data that you've brought in.
Mhm.
And so those are two things that we do. And then huge on primary sources. Right now we hear a lot of, that's illegal. That's illegal. What they're doing is illegal. And it's like, hold on. And people automatically are like, see, it's illegal. And I'm like, nope, but it's not. Like, you can look at the law, you can look at the way the Constitution's set up. And this is why I think it's so important that our kids know. And if you're in a different country, Canadians, like they need to know your Constitution. They need to know your Bill of Rights. They need to know what those things are. Because again, the more knowledge you have, what you were saying, Lisa, when you know the actual facts, you have that basis presented in clear way and you understand it, you're a lot harder to manipulate. And that is the thing. I think so many people are overwhelmed right now because there's so much emotional manipulation going on that it just is too much. So I don't know. But I think this
Well,
is also where we have the responsibility to make sure our kids know the foundations of these things so they can't be picked off to the side.
but also how to handle it when it happens, right? Because there are people out there that name called it, yeah, like you brought up earlier, because
Mhm.
they don't have any other way to express it. And I have watched, I would say in the last 12 months, I have watched people say they're not my friend anymore. I can't even be in the same room with them. Talking
Mhm.
about politics.
Hmm.
Politics is not, in my opinion, a reason to sever a relationship. There might be fundamental values at play that are so opposed that an intimate relationship is no longer possible. But an opinion on politics in and of itself is not a reason. And so when we talk with our kids about disagreeing, we talk about disagreeing respectfully. How to hold space for someone else's point of view and still have an opposing one and not make a moral judgment on the person, but only on the information being presented. You like Brussels sprouts. I hate Brussels sprouts. Does that mean you're a bad person, that your taste buds are screwed up, that you're inherently wrong, and that you should never be trusted when you say something is delicious? Maybe. I don't know. But probably not, right? Like I have friends that don't like bacon. I have friends that think coffee is disgusting. Do I think they're crazy?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Hey,
However,
yeah.
it's okay, right? Like it shouldn't affect our relationships. And so we like to talk with our kids about silly things like bacon, like coffee, where instead of saying, "Oh my gosh, you're crazy. How could you not like that?" I'm like, "Okay, you know what? How do we hold space for that opinion?" And maybe educate them if it's something that's really important educating on. And one of the things that I teach the kids is ask permission. Hey, I actually see that really differently. Do you mind if I share my point of view with you?
Mm.
Instead of just jumping in and blasting them with it. So we learn at home, even when they're younger, over silly little disagreements, things that do not have any massive consequence on the world. How to have those conversations, how to disagree, how to bring up different points of view, and how when you're uncomfortable and your feelings are big because somebody has attacked you for what you believe, to simply walk away before shutting someone out for good.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other part of the news that we as adults have to model for our children, how to read something that gets us so emotional and so upset and go, you know what? I'm not going to take that in. My boundary is that this doesn't get to come into my heart and my mind. It gets
Mhm.
to sit out here as information. And I'm going to walk away from it now and go be happy with my kids. I'm not going to sit here and stew all day.
I think too, one of the things we add to that is we always tell our kids, and my husband and I, this we say these things as we're processing things out loud all the time. We don't assume malice first. Like
Mhm.
somebody having a different perspective, we live in a world right now where just having a different point of view, the assumption is that you are after the other person, that you are evil, that you are, you must be. I'm going to just say it, you must be stupid. You must be a Nazi.
Yeah.
You must be a this. The language is just asinine. And I think one of the things we really drive home with our kids is we don't assume malice in others. Now, we don't take abuse either, right? That's another piece of the conversation. But we don't assume malice. Just because we have a disagreement doesn't mean that the other person is trying to get you. And I think, unfortunately, the thing you're talking about people saying, well, I'm not a part of that family anymore, I won't. That is something that is so prevalent right now, and it is so
Mhm.
heartbreaking. And unfortunately, we as a family have been on the receiving end of that. And you guys know me very well. I would
Mhm.
never name call, I would never force my views on anyone else. But that's something that just our existence and just having a different opinion actually severed our family, and it still breaks my heart. And we
Mm.
have we have made, and we take the stance of our door is always open, we are always welcome, and we've had to have these hard conversations with our kids that, like, no, we thought these things through, we made these decisions, but this is why it's even more important that we always move through the world not assuming malice, making space and having conversations well, so that you're never doing this to someone else. But it has become really common, and it's heartbreaking, and a lot of families have experienced this kind of pain and are trying to work through that with their kids too. And I think, that's another thing about protecting your peace and the volume of stuff that's coming your way. Sometimes you do just have to take a breather, and that's okay too,
Yeah.
because it can be really painful in the world we've got going right now. But we can always do better with our kids. We can always teach them to hold that space. We can teach them how to filter information. We can teach them to listen to each other and listen to other sides and opinions while still holding true to their values. And I think that's the hopeful piece, right? That having
Mhm.
this conversation, even right now, there's a lot of hope in that people, the deluge has actually made it even more vivid how important it is that we spend time
Absolutely.
teaching our kids these things so that they don't get pulled and tossed and thrown in different places.
Absolutely. You guys, this is such a good conversation. And I think that we're going to have to do another episode on just for some like practical tools and resources on ways that we can teach our kids to analyze the news, to look at social media, to even look at their things like their textbooks and what they're being, what we're the information that we are giving them to educate them, to look at those things critically. But before we wrap up this episode, is there any like one thing that you would leave with parents just to help them teach their kids to think more critically or to analyze these sources and these analyze these things that are coming in?
I think the biggest thing is ask questions and don't be afraid of not having the answers and
Ah,
having to go look for them. Like that's so important. And I think that's really the foundation of what we try to teach our kids.
yeah, that's so important because, like, if you are open with the fact that you don't know, then your kids are going to become more comfortable not knowing as well.
Mhm.
And saying, I don't know, but let's go find out, or let's go see what we can learn about that, or let's see what we can do that. And then it's a partnering, and they know that they're not alone in this
Mhm.
quest for the information. And they also know that it's okay to not know, which makes it therefore okay to go and find out. So
Yes.
I love that. That is so good.
Solid. I love it. I think that's a perfect way to end.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, we want to know what you have for us. What questions do you have? What perspective do you have on this issue? How have you taught your kids critical thinking skills and to just go with that difference between misinformation and being uninformed? How do you reconcile all of that in your home, in your homeschool? Let us know on social media, and be sure to check out our other episodes where we're going to come back and we're going to talk about this more, about some just practical ways that you can do that and help teach your kids. So we will see you guys next time.